Hey, we are two Star Wars nerds, and today we are talking about Return of the Jedi, specifically theorizing about this question. Did Obi Wan train Luke in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi?
Because someone had to.
Yeah, someone had to. The guy you see in the end of Empire Strikes Back is totally different than the guy
This confident Jedi walking in.
For sure. And it's interesting just because you do see a lot more skill, a lot more, a lot more like cunning thoughts. You just see him like acting very differently. Yeah. And so essentially between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, you have basically a year time span. And it's very evident that Luke has been training in this. And specifically, the reason I think it's plausible that Obi-Wan trained him is this very scene in Jabba's palace reeks of Obi-Wan in the best way. Because you see with Bib Fortuna, he's using Jedi mind tricks, which is a very Kenobi thing to do. You see that it's very elaborate. There's all of these pieces with Lando and with C-3PO and R2 and all of this stuff, Seems like something Kenobi would do. And there's also just this deception, just this sneaky way of breaking in. And in contrast, I think that Yoda would be like Solo. He would run in by himself and do things stealthily. And so, just on that, before we get a little deeper into things you picked up as well, what do you think in terms of kind of Jabba's palace?
It's one of my favorite scenes because I love Luke. So seeing Luke come in and like he's skilled, he's strategic, he has a plan, like you said, a very elaborate plan.
Yeah.
And so seeing Luke, that growth from Empire to Return, and just I think it's an awesome way to start Return of the Jedi, start us on this path, because you can't just go into him and Vader fighting. You have to see that there's been progress. So I think the scene is very important because it lets the audience know, like, hey, he's been working, he's been training, and you see the fruit. Because I don't know if it goes exactly how he planned, because we don't for sure know his plan, but it goes well, and I would say his mission's a success. So I think it's always cool to see Luke. It's cool to see Luke be the masterful, skilled Jedi that he was created to be. So I'm all about that. And I love seeing, obviously, in this movie, this is the first time we get all three back together, or I guess 5 with R2 and C-3PO. So there's a lot I love about this scene.
Yeah, and I think everything did not go as planned because of the Rancor pit.
Yeah, I don't know that he was expecting that. And
because of just certain things, but I think Yoda's approach would have been much more centered on the Force, where I feel like Obi-Wan would have taught him to basically be a warrior first, and then lightsabers, then the Force. That kind of seems like an Obi-Wan progression. So you noticed something in particular that helped drive this theory along when Luke says he's going back to the Dagobah system.
Later on.
After this, he says he needs to connect with an old friend. And when him and Yoda get together, it's a little interesting for us. So why don't you talk about that just for a second?
Yeah, just that line of him saying, I need to go back to visit my old friend, and that he needs to complete his training. It seems like he hasn't seen Yoda since he left an Empire to go save his friends. So that's what makes me think that Yoda was not the one training him within the past year. But then at the same time, I don't think you just learn to be a Jedi, and I don't think it's something you can learn on your own. You need to be trained. And so it's like, who was training? And obviously we know there's other Jedi alive, like Cal, Ahsoka, Ezra, but we don't exactly know where they're at. And I think it does make sense, and it is plausible for it to be the Force Ghost of Obi-Wan, because like you said, we see Obi-Wan in this plan. But I'm really interested to see if that's something we'll ever find out for sure, or if it was Obi-Wan who trained him. But I definitely don't think it was Yoda, just because of that. I think it would almost break canon if they made it Yoda. Because
and I think even with it not being Yoda, when he's in Yoda's house, Yoda's basically like, why are you looking at me like this? Like, when that's not exactly what he says, but he's so old and decrepit and he's sick. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, Luke's kind of looking at him like worried, like, man, you look rough right now.
Right.
And I mean, so I think you're right. I think it can't be Yoda. It doesn't really make sense.
Right.
Obi-Wan also shows up in Dagobah.
Yes.
And Luke's talking with him like, man, why didn't you tell me about this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you see all throughout A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, Obi-Wan keeps reaching out to Luke. Mm-hmm. And so it would make sense if on whatever adventures happen in that year, or just some training similar to what we see in the Millennium Falcon, mm-hmm. maybe we see Obi-Wan doing that very same thing.
The only thing that's weird is he finds out obviously that Vader is his father a year ago, and if Obi-Wan had been training him, why does he ask him a year later?
Yeah.
And I don't know if he's waiting for confirmation from Yoda, but I feel like if he was interacting with Obi, that may be a topic that's brought up, at least I would bring up. I don't think it discredits it. It's just like, it just makes me wonder, like, why did he wait? Was he waiting for Yoda's response on the matter before he approached Obi-Wan, or something else?
Yeah, and maybe too, it's with the shock of, you know, there's another, and he has a twin sister, mm-hmm. and he's like, why didn't you tell me about my dad? Why didn't you tell me about my sister?
It's just all coming out now.
Yeah. And maybe that's the first time that Obi-Wan shows up like that. Like maybe he would talk to him and didn't really give space for that.
That's very true.
But, you know, with that, we're very curious what people think about this.
Yes.
We think Luke had to have had some official training mm-hmm. in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So in the comments, let us know, do you think it's Obi-Wan? Do you think it's Yoda? Do you think it's someone completely different? And we'd love to have some discourse about that. Mm-hmm. This is a thing that hasn't been covered as far as we know, and I think it should be. Mm-hmm. So with that, we are two Star Wars nerds, and may the Force be with you always.